The Art of Leadership Network.
Hey leaders, welcome to the LeadCulture podcast, part of the Art of Leadership Network. I'm your host, Jenni Catron, CEO of the Foresight Group. We're a company dedicated to helping leaders develop thriving teams. Each week, I'll be your guide as we explore practical strategies to equip you with the tools you need to lead with clarity, confidence, and build unstoppable momentum in your organization. My mission is to be your trusted coach, empowering you to master the art of self-leadership so you'll learn to lead yourself well so you can lead others better. Each week, we take a deep dive on a leadership or a culture topic. You'll hear stories from amazing guests and leaders like you who are committed to leading well. So let's dive in and keep learning on this leadership journey together. Today, I have an episode on a topic that maybe is a little sensitive. We're going to talk about 11 signs of an insecure leader. Now, guys, the reason why I bring this up is because a number of years ago, actually one of my first book that I wrote on my own, I had a co-authored book initially, and then really my second book is a book called Clout, Discover and Unleash Your God-Given Influence. And in this book, I talk about the 7 clout killers, the things that I think really hold leaders back from leading well. And you heard it there in the intro that self-leadership is essential to leading well. You know it. You've experienced it, right? Like, you know, when you're not in a great place, it impacts the people around you. And so when I wrote this first book, it was really that reflection on what was I learning as a leader? What were the things that were holding me back or tripping me up from leading well? And I distilled it down to 7 things that I noticed in my own life as a leader. And I was seeing in a lot of the leaders that I was both studying and coaching and just, in conversations with. And so I distilled it down to 7 things. But one of them, the one that I want to focus on today, is this topic of insecurity. Because this one is a really hard one to admit. And I'm going to be very honest and say that insecurity is one that has tripped me up time and time again as a leader. And I find that this is the one we want to avoid, right? Like, gosh, it feels like we should have been able to get through this sometime in middle school. But what I find with the clout killers that I identify in the book, they're like hurdles, right? Like we go over one and then we go a little bit further and we hit it again. And it's because we're at a different place. We're at a different stage in our career. We're in a different stage in life. And something that might not have tripped us up in the past now trips us up in this season. Or it's like we're learning it in a different way, or we're experiencing it in a different way because our circumstances are different. And so I think insecurity is one of those things that creeps in for the best of us. And if we're not willing to acknowledge it, it really can inhibit our growth. So I want to start by sharing and contrasting a couple stories. So I am sharing a good bit of this content straight from my book, Clout. This book, gosh, guys, every time I pick it back up, I am personally convicted. It's amazing how when you write, like, you really are writing for yourself and you're hoping it's to the benefit of others. And so even though this book has been out 10 years now, it is still like just a resource I go back to go, okay, what was I studying and learning in that era, and what is it telling me now? And so even as I picked this back up for the sake of this episode, it got my attention. It got me thinking about the stage I'm in now and some of the insecurities and fears I'm facing in this stage of growth as a leader. And so I hope it's helpful to you as well. So I want to start with a couple of stories. Let's talk about Tim. Tim was really one of the most brilliant people I'd ever worked with. He had amazing ideas, a great work ethic, passion, conviction, but insecurity got the best of him. Constant growth and change repeatedly provided challenges for all of us. Like this was years ago in another organization, another time, and the names have been changed. So the story is based upon individuals that I worked with, but the names have been changed. So we were in a stage of constant growth, repeated change, and we were all feeling those challenges. So every one of us was feeling it. But Tim just couldn't get comfortable with it, right? Like he really wrestled with just the level of change that we were experiencing. The success of the company required quick response, right? We had to be on our feet. That was the season that we were in. Deadlines were tight. The workload had to be outsourced to keep up with the demands. Like we were just having to find different new ways to do things because we needed to move fast. And several times our boss took a project that would ordinarily be assigned to Tim, and he gave it to another team member in order to spread out the workload. So, our boss was kind of blocking and tackling. We had a lot to get done. It was an effort to help distribute the work among the team. And I'll be honest, even, sometimes that happened to me and it would prick my insecurities too, right? Like it would be like, oh, did you think I wasn't good enough? Like, why'd you give that to somebody else? I can handle it. But Tim came unglued by this. Like if he felt like it belonged to him and it was redirected, it really rattled him. Whenever a project was taken away from him, he regarded it as a personal attack. No matter how well our boss explained the situation and reinforced his belief in Tim, Tim reacted defensively. Like he just reacted defensively. New staff members were added and our team was expanded. And that meant that every one of us had to divide our workloads and give up a part of our jobs. That was just the nature of it. We were growing. We had to keep redistributing responsibilities. But Tim couldn't shake the fear that somehow he was not doing enough and that all these changes and additions were an indictment of his performance rather than an outcome of our success, right? Like these changes were really about the success we were having as a team, but it felt personal to him. So instead of being the thriving, contributing team member that he had always been, Tim turned into a defensive, territorial, and reclusive team member. Despite numerous conversations, pep talks, and encouragement from our boss, Tim couldn't shake his insecurities about the changes, and he eventually resigned. Now, in contrast, Rebecca, who was another team member in that era, saw the changes as an opportunity to grow. Like she just leaned into it. Rather than perceive the new members as threats, she embraced them as people to invest in. Confident in her knowledge and abilities, she contributed her best to the team while strategically helping bring out the best in everyone else. Like she just saw the opportunity and the possibility. She was helpful. She was engaged. She was committed. And it's no surprise that Rebecca continued to be promoted and given even greater opportunities to lead. So if you're like me and you don't like the word insecurity, you might prefer to think of it as the state of not being confident. So here's what I want you to hear. We need to talk about this. I bet you saw people came to mind as you heard both of those stories. You probably could identify with one or the other that was more your inclination as a leader. And we need to talk about how insecurity impacts us as leaders. So if you don't love the word, you might think of it as a state of not being confident. I'm completely okay with that. What I want you to do is I want you to be paying attention to how it's impacting you as a leader. Insecurity can strike even the most confident leader. And I suspect most of us can relate to not feeling confident from time to time. Every hand raised, right? Like we've all had seasons where we do not feel confident. Not confident in our ideas, our abilities, our gifts, our talents, our dreams, our relationships, our purpose, our significance. You fill in the blank. Momentary lack of confidence is rather normal. Right? That's kind of normal, that we're going to have those moments. Whether you're confronted with something that will stretch us, change us, or grow us, we're likely to feel a level of insecurity. And that's okay. That's good. Insecurity is often sparked by fear and antagonized by doubt. Sparked by fear, and some fears are legitimate, like that's okay, but it's antagonized by doubt. Insecurity causes us to wrestle with that fear that we're not enough, right? Like fear that we're not good enough, we're not strong enough, we're not smart enough, we're not kind enough, we're not beautiful enough, or witty enough, or creative enough. Again, you fill in the blank with whatever your not enough is. And so our influence becomes compromised when we experience a perpetual lack of confidence. That's when it kind of creeps to insecurity. That fear that kind of sparks insecurity raises questions that, just start to cause us to unravel a little bit. And so let me give you a definition of insecurity. And then we're going to dig into this a little bit more. Insecurity refers to a profound sense of self-doubt, a deep feeling of uncertainty about our basic worth and our place in the world. Insecurity is associated with chronic self-consciousness, along with a chronic lack of confidence in ourselves and anxiety about our relationships. The insecure man or woman lives in constant fear of rejection and a deep uncertainty about whether his or her own feelings and desires are legitimate. Now, there's a ton kind of baked into that, but let me highlight a few phrases. A profound sense of self-doubt, uncertainty about our basic worth and place in the world, chronic self-consciousness, chronic lack of confidence, fear of rejection, and uncertainty about whether our feelings and desires are legitimate. And so my guess is that you probably related to a couple of those descriptors, right? Like you've probably had some moments of insecurity somewhere along the way. What we're trying to identify is when is this insecurity starting to really trip us up as leaders? Because how you respond to insecurity can drastically impact your influence, right? Lead yourself well to lead others better. Everything rises and falls on leadership is what Maxwell says. Like how you respond to insecurity can drastically impact the influence that you're having on others. Tim and Rebecca's stories portray the stark differences in the trajectory of our influence if we allow insecurity to gain a foothold, right? Like Tim let the insecurity get the best of him. Rebecca saw the changes and the opportunities, and I'm sure there were some insecurities in her as well, but she didn't let them get the best of her. Like she kind of acknowledged the doubt, she acknowledged the fear, and she chose to lean into it rather than succumb to it. Author Beth Moore explained it well. She says, not only will insecurity cheat us of reaching and then operating consistently at maximum potential, it also will turn our coworkers into threats and trap us into becoming posers. So for leaders, insecurity can assume dangerous disguises. Often when we think of insecure people, we think mousy or timid or wallflower types, right? Like that's sometimes what we think of when we hear the word insecurity. But that's not typically what insecurity looks like for leaders. And perhaps that's why we're prone to ignore it, because we don't always recognize it. It masks itself. It shows up in different ways. Some insecure leaders learn to mask that fear, right? That with false confidence, gregariousness, brashiness, and bossiness, right? They just come on more aggressive. Other insecure leaders hide their lack of confidence behind performance. They just do more. They keep going. In their quest to be enough, they continue to focus on achievement, believing they can perform their way into the approval of others and ultimately into the self-confidence that they seek. And that's sometimes how insecurity has played out for me. If I'm not enough, I'll do everything I possibly can to be enough. I'll work harder. I'll do more. I'll get, like as a kid, I would get better grades. I'd be a great employee, like whatever it takes to be what I think others expect me to be. But that doesn't actually address the true issue of insecurity, which is that self-doubt piece that I have to address. And so insecurity can take on numerous faces and impact our influence in a variety of ways. And so I want to give you 11 kind of signs of an insecure leader, maybe ways that insecurity might be showing up. Now, you're going to have a tendency to think about everybody else because you're not going to want to admit to these. I get it. I'm also not saying that every one of these is you every day. But I want you to think about what circumstances might pull this insecure behavior out of you, or which one of these are you kind of prone to, like in an unhealthy day, or if you're just a little tired, right? Like when we're not at our best, that's when we're most susceptible to some of things like insecurity. And so I'm going to talk about these 11 signs of an insecure leader. And I want you to first be self-reflective. And then I bet there's going to be people that come to mind that you're like, gosh, that is, somebody on my team. If it's somebody that you have influence with, you might create an opportunity for a conversation, right? To just open the door. Or you might just choose to be praying for that individual and because you're seeing the ripple effect of their influence. But let's look at these 11 signs of an insecure leader. Number one, insecure leaders become the influenced rather than the influencers. Because they are so susceptible to others' impressions, they cater their actions and decisions to what will appease others. Rather than be confident in the perspective they bring, they temper their ideas and give only a fraction of their true selves. In turn, they rob themselves and others of their unique God-given influence. So number one is that insecure leaders become the influenced rather than the influencers. Like they kind of forsake that right because they're so worried about how others perceive them that they end up just being influenced by everybody else instead of actually being an influencer. Number two, insecure leaders sometimes come across as aloof and insensitive. In your insecurity, you don't engage with others, right? Like you kind of hold back. Leaders who remain cold and distant from others have an air of superiority. It's not what they intend to project, but that's how it's often experienced. You don't feel this way. In fact, you probably feel the opposite. Yet because of your position of influence, leaders, especially when you have a position of influence, people rarely assume that you lack confidence. That is not what they're defaulting to. They perceive that you just don't care. So if you are aloof, if you're insensitive, if you're just kind of disconnected because of insecurity, the people around you see that and perceive that, and they're not assuming insecurity. They're assuming you just don't care about them. Number three, insecure leaders can assume an air of false confidence or pride. So they overcompensate for their insecurity by appearing to have limitless confidence, right? Like they overcompensate. Boisterous, gregarious, opinionated, strong, and direct. An insecure leader bullies his or her way into influence by being the most assertive person in the room. Now, there are some people who are naturally kind of bold and dynamic. I'm not suggesting that they're all insecure, but oftentimes people can overcompensate for insecurity by just being over the top on the other extreme. Number four, insecure leaders can be controlling and inflexible. The only way they know how to manage their world is by keeping tight control. They're terrified of change because it means confronting the unknown. Confronting the unknown could result in failure. And they perceive failure as the ultimate verdict that they are not enough. So insecure leaders, we will be controlling and inflexible because we're fearful of what could happen. We're fearful of failure. Number five, insecure leaders blame others when things don't go well, right? Like they're quick to point the finger. They get angry because they see failure, whether it's themselves or their team. And particularly if their team fails, they see it as a poor reflection on themselves, right? And so they quickly want to deflect that. And while leaders are responsible for their teams, insecure leaders view team mistakes as personal defeat. They are more interested in defending themselves than having their team grow through the situation, right? So they're more concerned with defending themselves than helping their team grow and learn from that mistake or that failure. Number six, insecure leaders find fault with everyone else. They often hold themselves to a very high standard, right? Because they don't want to fail. So they have a very high standard of themselves. And in turn, they have extraordinary and often unrealistic expectations of everyone else. So they have that high standard for themselves and they hold everyone to that as well. So if they can point out a weakness in others, they subconsciously see themselves as better. And gosh, I hate this, you guys. And again, I'm not saying that all of us, any of us do these things all the time, but I do see moments where these things are present in my leadership. Number seven, insecure leaders see themselves as victims. Everyone else is the enemy, right? Like they're kind of on guard, right? They're kind of on guard because everyone else is out to get them. They are forever on the defensive and rarely able to believe the best in others, right? And again, there's mountains of counseling we probably need to help us unpack where some of these insecurities come from. And I'm smiling, but I'm not meaning to make light of that. It's actually really important work that we need to do as leaders, because as I'm reading these, you're going, ouch, ooh, I've done that at some point. And you've experienced it from another leader at some point. And so our commitment to the sacred work of leadership is recognizing I need to do the work, whether that means I need to go meet with a counselor, I need to just continue to process these things, I need to become more aware of them. I need to do the work because the people that I lead deserve better. They deserve the healthiest version of me. And so that work is really, really valuable and really, really significant. Okay, number 8, insecure leaders resist feedback. They always have an excuse for why they do what they do. Because of their position, they have difficulty receiving feedback from people whom they don't perceive to have greater authority than they do. So insecure leaders are very attentive to authority. And so if you don't have that same level of authority, they're going to be dismissive of your feedback oftentimes. In other words, they don't seek to learn from everyone in every situation, right? So insecure leaders often are not learners. They resist feedback, and they don't put themselves in a posture of learning because that's vulnerable. Number 9, insecure leaders measure everything against their internal structure of hierarchy. So I kind of said this already, but they create a pecking order for everyone and are constantly measuring their position, right? So they're constantly figuring out, where do I measure up? How am I doing against everybody else? Their goal is the top, and they're more focused on what it takes to get themselves to the top than to help everyone grow along the way, right? So they're kind of in it for themselves. Number 10, insecure leaders absorb the emotions of everyone around them. When the team is discouraged, they are discouraged. When someone else is unhappy, they are unhappy. When their boss is cranky, they become uneasy because of his or her crankiness. And so instead of helping set the temperature, which is what leaders should do, they're reacting and responding to how everybody else is feeling. And number 11, insecure leaders can be obsessive people pleasers. Fearful of losing favor, they waffle in making decisions that make others uncomfortable. And as a result, their leadership is lackluster, void of the convictions that set leaders apart. Youch. This feels like a little bit of a heavy episode, you guys. I'm sorry about that. But I think it's really important because I think sometimes we need to do some good self-reflection. We need to really look at, okay, how am I showing up? Because we always give ourselves plenty of grace, right? We always have excuses for, we just had a bad day. And so that's why we were a little insecure. But in reality, the experience that our teams are having because of our insecurity can be really detrimental to our growth, both as leaders and as a team, and ultimately for the health of the organizations that we serve. And so I hope these 11 things got you just thinking a little bit today. I hope you'll spend more time evaluating yourself rather than pointing fingers at others, just going, okay, what do I need to learn? What do I need to take away? Where's insecurity creeping in me? I hope for most of you, it's very minimal. But I want you to be honest with yourself about where insecurity might be inhibiting your leadership, because how you lead you impacts everyone else around you. So let me give you 3 things. Let's end on a hopeful note. Here's 3 things you can do to help you think about overcoming insecurity. First one is identify where insecurity is impacting your influence. So kind of what I just said, where is it showing up? Acknowledge the ways that you're susceptible to those feelings of self-doubt. Where does this show up for you? Perhaps you can share it with a trusted friend or a family member. Ask for them to help you be more aware of when insecurity is getting the best of you. Like sometimes other people close to you that you trust, that they're safe, you can empower them to say, hey, will you show me when you see those little moments of insecurity? When does that show up? Because I might not even be fully aware of it. So can you give me a little insight there? And when I see signs of insecurity popping up, take just a few minutes and write about it in a journal. Like sometimes just getting it out is actually really helpful. I document the feelings of insecurity and try to discern what about that situation is causing them, right? So I'm just trying to analyze it. Like I try to go to a logical place and go, okay, where's that coming from? What caused it? What's behind that? And doing this keeps me from sinking deeper into those feelings of insecurity because I'm acknowledging them head on rather than ignoring them. I'm just saying, okay, there it is. And one of my convictions when I'm coaching leaders is that awareness leads to growth. Right? Like as we become more aware, we're more equipped to take action on it. So when you see these little moments of insecurity popping up, it's like, okay, take action. Let's process this. Let's think this through. Let's kind of journal this out so that I can take action on what's at the root of this. How do I need to grow through this? Number 2, commit it to prayer. I'm a person of faith. And I know that there's so much about my growth that I need to ultimately trust God with. And so at the risk of this sounding like a Sunday school answer, I'm thinking of 1 Peter 5:7, where he says, cast all your cares upon him, for he cares for you. So what if we really embrace the idea that God cares deeply about the things that concern us, right? God cares deeply about the things that concern us. And what's more, he cares deeply about the things that are holding us back from doing the creative best with the life that he's given us, with the responsibilities that he's given us, with the influence that he's given us. Like, he cares deeply that you're leading yourself well to lead others better. And then number 3, turn your attention to others, right? Sometimes we just get self-focused, like we're just focused on ourselves. So when you're tempted to be insecure, look for something that you can do for someone else. Find anything, interrupt that inner dialogue and do something for someone else. It gets that focus off of yourself. When you're feeling insignificant, how can you make someone else feel special? If you're feeling like a failure, how can you encourage someone else? If you're fearful of losing influence, how can you champion someone else, right? Like, just flip that script to think about someone else, because it's not about you, right? It's not about you. Your leadership isn't about you. It's about serving others. And insecurity makes it about you. You ask the questions of, did I do enough? Was I good enough? Am I smart enough? Like, all of those questions you start to fixate on. And the replacement for that perspective is that it's not about you. It's what God is doing through you and for others. Your self-worth is no longer on the line when you shift that perspective. So as you're processing this today, what part of the definition of insecurity most resonates? Can you identify where that might have started? Like, where did that come from? Like, what is it in your story, in your past, in your history that maybe has caused that to be there? There's probably a really fair and reasonable reason for that, but understanding it is really helpful, right? And then where do you see insecurity impacting your influence? Which one of those 11 signs did you kind of cringe when I read it? And that's a great place to start. Because leaders, we are entrusted with the sacred work of leadership. We are changing and affecting the lives of the people that we lead and we serve with day in and day out. And so how we lead ourselves impacts our influence on others. So while this is a little bit heavier of a topic today, I hope that it gave you some things to think about, some things to process, so you can keep growing and leading well. Well, I would love to hear your feedback on today's episode. What was helpful? Which one of these 11 signs of an insecure leader stood out to you? And give me some feedback. You can email me at podcast@getforesight.com. You can catch up with us on social media at getforesight or at Jenni Catron. And share this with a friend. Maybe there is a friend that is just safe and trusted that you can say, hey, I listened to this episode. It kind of convicted me. I'd love for you to tell me which one of these signs of an insecure leader shows up in my work or in my life, and spark a good, healthy conversation. You know, I mentioned in the episode that a good counselor is a really good friend to every leader. And sometimes just a really good friend who can be really honest and is safe and can reflect back to you what they see, because they're with you day in and day out, can be absolute gold. Like, I've had these leaders in my journey through the years where I've had maybe a peer that just I developed a relationship with, and we got really honest with each other because we would see each other in action at work. And so we would give each other that feedback. Well, this is an opportunity to do that. Share this episode with one friend and then sit down over a cup of coffee or tea and talk about it together and just share honestly and then encourage each other. Because we get better when we commit to doing the work. So friends, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for being committed to leading well. It matters. Your leadership matters. We need you thriving and healthy so we can keep influencing others for good. And if we can get you more leadership resources, I want to make sure that you are signed up for my weekly email newsletter. Call it the Insights newsletter. You can go to getforesight.com. There'll be a little pop-up that says, sign me up for weekly insights. That's the best way to stay up to date on new articles, new podcast episodes, anything that we've got going on that we're doing in leadership and culture spaces, we're going to tell you about it there first. So if you are not signed up, please go to getforesight.com, GET, the number 4, SIGHT, and make sure you're signed up for a newsletter. And that way we can stay connected even beyond the podcast. So friends, thanks for listening today. Keep leading well, and I'll see you next week.